Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the 27th of April. I would like to welcome the gallery and those who are attending online, and I would like to also acknowledge the Ballardong Noongar people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where we meet today, and the Eward and Whadjuk people, who are also traditional custodians of respective lands within the wider Shire of Toodyay. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Our records of attendance, we have Councillor Wrench, who is attending via Zoom, and all councillors are currently in attendance. Just reminding those who may not be aware that Mrs. Bateman, our Manager of Corporate and Community Services, is standing in as acting CEO while the CEO is on leave. The housekeeping rules, just remember please, all mobile phones, please to be switched off or on vibrate. If you need to take a call, please depart chambers, and in the event of an emergency, the exits are, please take the most direct exit for yourselves out of the building. Thank you. Can we please scroll down, Maria? Right. We have no approved leave of absences that have been presented, nor applications for leave of absence. Councillors, do we have any disclosures of interest? Public questions. Maria, can I just clarify, do we have any public questions taken on notice? No. Thank you. So we'll move to public question time. I welcome anybody who wishes to raise a question. Would you like to please go to the podium, Mr. Foley? And I just remind that we respect the office and our representation to the community. Please be respectful in the use of your language and how we address each other and terms we use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's Brian Foley, Jewers Pool. Just wondering, what's an update on your financial software package, Datascape? What's the progress now on it?
Thank you. I'll just pass that question to the acting CEO, who is also one of the key drivers of this.
Through the chair. We are having regular meetings twice a week with the executives of Datacom to work through some of the issues. It is a time-consuming process and a very complicated process, but we continue to work through these issues.
It's mainly just reporting and legislation. Thank you. Any further questions,
yes,
Mr.
Is
Foley?
it affecting how the Shire works at this stage and preparing for the upcoming budget?
Through the chair. It is definitely complicating the situation with preparing the budget. It makes the reporting for the financials a bigger job than it should be. But again, we've got people on board to work through these issues.
Has the Shire been cost affected by it, incurring any extra costs?
Would you like to clarify that a little further?
Well, just wondering whether you've had to employ any more staff, etc., because the system is not working as it should be?
Thank you.
So the additional costs for staff time or consultants' time has been factored into the budget. It was presented at the mid-year budget review if any variations were required to the adopted budget. But we are managing those expenditures within the current budget.
And one last one, are you still paying Datacom any maintenance fees or etc. because of the lack of the system not working? Are there any fees still being paid?
Yes, so we still pay the monthly fees, which I think is around $3,300 a month. So they're our monthly costs.
So I suppose the major question is why are the fees still being paid when you've bought a system that's not working?
It is working and we are receiving a service from them. We continue to work through some of the anomalies of the IT structures of the system that haven't been fine-tuned for our purposes yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Can we move with the agenda? Thank you. We'll move to confirmation of the minutes. The ordinary meeting of council held on the 23rd of March. Do I have any questions or clarifications regarding this item? Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Hart. All in favour of accepting the ordinary meeting, the minutes of the ordinary council meeting? That's all.
Haven't asked if there are any objections, or can you move straight to voting if with
We
just a mover?
will ask,
Yeah.
are there any objections? If there's no objections, we'll have that carried 9.3, thank you. Unanimously. 9.3 is the standing order, Councillor. Moving to the agenda briefing held on the 20th of April, that we acknowledge that the notes of the agenda briefing be confirmed. Are there any questions, clarifications arising out of this matter? Councillor McEwen.
Yeah, on page 17 of the agenda briefing notes, I asked a question.
Just bear with us as
Page
find
17.
the position.
Yeah. It's just a correction to a word.
Please
Yeah, okay.
continue.
I asked a question in the top box on that page. If the building is declared inhabitable, it says, I actually said, if the building is declared uninhabitable.
So that is just a typo you wish corrected?
That one is, yeah.
Yes, certainly.
And I've got a...
Have you noted that, Maria? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And on page 19, it starts on bottom page 18. Councillor Pearce asked a question on the bottom of page 18. About whether the property if the building on the property is not to be demolished, would it have to be strata titled? To which the response was, if we considered the application as a group dwelling, this is on the bottom of page 18, if we had considered the application as a group dwelling, one of the conditions would be that they would have to go through that process for the strata title. So that's okay. And I followed that up about, is there legislation saying it would have to be strata title group dwelling, and the answer was basically no. I think those two answers contradict each other.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor McEwen.
I'm just referring to the Manager of Development and Regulation, Mr Hugo de Vos.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Councillor McEwen. You're quite correct there. I think the previous response to Councillor Pearce is redundant based on that additional information that I've supplied.
Is there some way we can clarify that in the notes?
you have a suggestion of how it could be better clarified, Mr De Vos, or Councillor McEwen? So we have,
No, I just know that they contradict each other, that's all. And then if somebody reading that in the future may be confused about which one's correct.
perhaps we need to clarify that later data or later information. How would you, as you're the purveyor of that information, how would you care that to be recorded?
I would suggest that an amendment to Councillor Pearce's question be provided saying that we wouldn't be required to put a condition because there's no statutory requirement for them to have the property strata title, but it is an option that we would be able to see.
Do you wish the question in front of you for a moment, just to...
Can do, yep.
Yep.
So my answer, okay, so the question is, we did ask for it to be demolished, but if it was not, if it was not to have been demolished, would the criteria that must be strata titled to be a group dwelling? And the answer is no. There is not a requirement for it to be strata titled, so that's a correction.
Right. Then you want that stand corrected?
Yes, please.
Right, thank you. Councillor McEwen, anything further to that matter? Thank you. Returning to the agenda briefing, are there any further questions or clarifications? Is there any objections? Generally, no. Can I have a mover, please, that the officer's recommendation, that the agenda briefing notes
in their self-report that were consistent with these personality disorders.
Thank you. Be Councillor Wrench. Did you receive that clearly? No, thank you. Right. Do we have a mover for accepting the agenda briefing notes with that amendment? Thank you. Councillor McEwen. Moving to the next item, please, Maria. What? That was carried by 9.3 with no objections. Thank you, Maria. Yes, we did. So the changes were included, which was page 17. I'll read them out for those that may be listening in and can't see the screen very well. The amendment to the briefing notes was page 17. The word uninhabitable replaced the word uninhabitable. And page 18, the response to Councillor Pearce's question be amended to read that there is no requirement for strata title. We've not received any petitions, deputations, presentations, and I believe there are no submissions in the gallery. Is that correct, Mr. Foley? Thank you. In which case we'll move to the announcement by the presiding member. The Shire President's announcement is in accordance with the Shire of 2J Standing Orders, Local Law 2008, Section 4.3, and is as follows. ANZAC. ANZAC is a time for national reflection. At the 25th of April, dawn and 11 a.m. ANZAC services, we paid our respects and commemorated the contribution and suffering of all those who served and those who died in all wars, conflicts and peacekeeping operations. It is a time to remember peace is fragile. It is brought at great cost and dependent upon all of us. There is an obligation to choose wisely who leads our nation, to understand proposed state and national decisions and support the men and women who defend us. Remember Ukraine, how quickly lives changed, the price being paid and the strength of a nation that stands together. Referring to local planning policy review, a new approach in review of local planning policies are working groups comprised of 2 to 3 councillors with community representatives with expertise of the subject of review. Heritage and extractive industries are the first policy working groups established. We also have a transport review being undertaken in a number of areas, so that roads are being reviewed at many levels and in brief includes the assessment of road ownership, key freight routes and a bypass option for Stirling Terrace, improved native vegetation assessment models and clearing permit times, a conservation covenant of 123.28 hectares of Wandoo woodland, which is irrevocable, to serve as an offset bank and an expanded roadside vegetation maintenance program. These are the areas that we are now currently investigating and looking at. The Shire President's activities have been written there for those who may be interested to account for my time. Thank you. We will now move to the first item of business, which was the draft local planning policy for dams, but which we were intending to withdraw and move to a workshop for further consideration. There were a number of items there that we felt further conversation would perhaps be beneficial. Moving to the second item of business. So is there a motion? I have moved that it's withdrawn and moved to the workshop. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Ruthin. All in favour? Certainly, Councillor McEwen.
Sorry, the agenda I've been given still includes the original officer's recommendation. So,
Yes, it did. Yes, that's correct.
so which one was the amended one put on the website?
It was, we had not, did you amend that further or was that, excuse me for a minute.
No, we amended it with the changes that we agreed upon when we discussed it at the agenda briefing.
Yep.
And that's the amended officer recommendation as listed.
But we had still not really discussed how that would be structured within the policy, and I think that was put that if we're going to do, for argument's sake, a risk assessment, those sort of aspects that are complementary to the policy, that should be within the policy. I did articulate that by email. If council, I will leave this to council's decision. All right, if council wishes to withdraw this matter or wish to proceed with it as it is, will just let me know. So I have moved that, and it's been seconded to withdraw. we'll put it to the vote if council would prefer to continue.
Well, I can raise a point of order. Can we use that provision in the standing orders where we just move to the next item of business, whichever one that is?
We haven't formally moved, I mentioned it
No,
was...
no, but you have.
I have, yes, I have.
Yeah, yeah.
And technically, I have stated it was withdrawn. However, it is council that makes the decision.
No,
And I think,
the reason I'm confused
I
is,
understand
No.
what you're saying.
is that doesn't match what we advertised.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
I was of the understanding that the amendments would be put as an alternate recommendation, not as a amendment of the actual agenda point. So that was that and the fact there was further conversation was why I was moving that it would be removed. So we have a seconder, councillors. Anybody in favour of moving this to a workshop to be further discussed, this item? All in favour? So we have Councillor Wrench, how do you vote?
I vote in favour.
Thank you. So the motion is carried 5. And those against? I'm not sure how you're voting there, Councillor McCormick. Sorry, 4 or against? 4. In which case there was 3, 4, 5, 6. So we had 6 have voted for it, which was Councillor Madachi, Councillor Ruthin, Councillor Hart, Councillor McCormick, Councillor McEwen and Councillor Wrench. And then against was Councillor Pearce and Councillor... you might need to put it up a bit harder. So we have 1 against, Councillor Pearce, and all councillors supported.
Could I just have a point of order? When you had a seconder, you didn't call to support it or objections to it. So should that have happened or not?
No, because we were not debating the merits of the item on the agenda. We were simply debating whether or not it would be deferred or dealt with in the meeting.
I think I might have still liked to have said something why I objected to the withdrawal, but it has been passed now.
Thank you. Moving to the second item. Before we commence on this, oh no, this is fine. This is 9.1.2, which is lot sub 101 Beaufort Street West 2J, the 4-dog application. The officer's recommendation is before us. Councillors, do we have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Ruthin. Are there any questions or clarifications arising from this item? Are there any objections to this item? I actually have an objection to this item. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Pearce. Councillor Ruthin, would you care to speak to the motion?
Thank you. I support the officer's recommendation to refuse this application for the following reasons. The owners have 2 more dogs than they are permitted. 2 of the dogs are unregistered and unsterilised. The owners have stated in writing that their reason for keeping 4 dogs is their intention to use the 2 retrievers for breeding. One of the unregistered and unsterilised dogs has already been used for breeding. We don't know if the pups have been sold or given away. And dog breeding is classed as an animal establish, which is not a permitted use in the special residential zoning under LPS 4. The term assistance dogs is emotive, and there is apparently no regulation of assistance dogs. Approval of this application could set a precedent for other dog applications where any dogs in excess of the number of permitted animals could be called assistance dogs. Any breed can be used for an assistance dog so long as the temperament is suitable, and that can be anything from greyhounds to a gorgeous dog I met last week on my travels, which is a wolfhound staghound cross. So I don't think there are sufficient grounds to allow these dogs to be registered.
As the objector, I have to apologise to you all. Somehow in my rush today, I forgot that it was actually recommended to be refused. So I withdraw my objection. Are there any people who wish to speak further for the item, as we have no objectors? In which case, Councillor Ruthin, do you have the right of reply?
I have nothing further to add, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour of the officer's recommendation as it stands? Thank you. That was carried unanimously. I'll just check with Councillor Wrench. How did you vote?
I vote in favour.
Thank you. Unanimous. Moving to item 9.1.3, Lot 2, Stirling Terrace, the proposed painting of the exterior woodwork at St Aloysius Boys School. The officer's recommendation is that the development be permitted and must be commenced within 2 years from the date of this decision letter, and the development is hereby permitted taking place in accordance with the approved plans. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Are there any questions or clarifications arising from this item? Certainly, Councillor McCormick.
Just would appreciate some confirmation that the painting of the woodwork that has been carried out recently is only an undercoat and not, they haven't proceeded to paint without approval, a final coat.
Mr De Vos.
Thank you. I believe the Planning and Compliance Officer did speak to the applicant about it, and she is actually in the chambers at the moment. Toby, are you able to confirm?
Yes, so far we stopped working through James without approving.
Thank you. For those that couldn't hear, they were advised to stop working until they had their approvals in place. Are there any objections to this item, councillors? If not, this item is carried by Standing Order 9.3 unanimously. Moving to item 9.1.4, Lot 18, Timber Creek Crescent, Coondle, a proposed single dwelling with a setback variation. The officer's recommendation is that council grants development approval for a single dwelling at Lot 18, Timber Creek Crescent, Coondle, subject to conditions. The conditions are listed below. Could you please scan down, Maria? which are the standard conditions the development is permitted, hereby permitted, must substantially commence within 2 years from the date of the decision letter, and that the development hereby permitted taking place in accordance with the plan submitted with the application, and that the stormwater shall be discharged in a manner so there is no discharge onto the adjoining properties to the satisfaction of the local government. That is the officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover, please? Councillor Pearce. Do I have any questions or clarifications with regard to this item?
Thank you. We were given an aerial view photo of the property, but at the start of the meeting. Could I just have an explanation, please, of what the yellow lines refer to?
That'd be the building envelope. Mr De Vos?
Yes, through the chair. Sorry, I was so rushed getting that out today. So the red line is the boundary property and the yellow line is the 30-metre boundary setback.
Thank you. Councillor Ruthin?
Thank you. Looking at this aerial photo, the property behind, or actually further up the hill, looks like it's within 10 metres of the boundary. Is that right? Or it looks like rainwater tanks and a shed, and then the house. So
That looks, yeah, it's correct.
So they would have had planning approval to do that?
It depends. I don't know about this property.
Okay.
So, but yes, it is definitely within the current boundary setback of 30 metres.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's all right, just be careful. Councillor McEwen? Oh, sorry, McCormick?
Just for clarification, on that colour printout, which of the houses was the party opposing the setback variation?
Through the chair, if I may ask the Planning and Compliance Officer.
Excuse me, Mrs. Prater, you'll need to get a microphone. Yep. Thank you.
So we advertised to the property which the house was closest to, so they were the ones that replied in regards to. So this one here. So that's their boundary, and that would be the closest property next door. Yep,
So
that's correct.
So basically it's the northwest house.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or clarifications? Are there any objections? There's another question. Councillor Ruthin?
I'm looking at the answers that we've been provided to the additional questions that I sent last night, and I apologise for the lateness of those questions. We're told that the owners are aware that it would be easier to rotate and move the house to have less site works. However, if we moved in a more easterly direction, the owners would then have no view. Is that something that we consider when making this decision?
Through the chair, generally views are not a valid planning consideration. However, I think people have the right to try and get the best possible outcome whenever they are doing their development. So whilst it might not be something for council to consider, it certainly might be valid for them to put forward.
Any further? Councillor McEwen. Oh, McCormick.
Is this an offer for an objection?
I will be calling for an objection in a moment. So if there's no further questions or clarifications, do we have any objections? Councillor McCormick.
I have an objection based on the fact that the topography of this block is typically 2J, and it has as many or as little problems finding a home site as many. I'm a firm believer that stumped homes provide the ability to orientate and position a house on any block within the existing setback guidelines. I'd like to point to the third paragraph on page 15 of the agenda. I find the statement by under the title consultative. It reads, as previously outlined, the topography on this land parcel makes adhering to the 30-metre setbacks impossible. I find that I have doubts about the merits of that statement. So therefore I object to minimising the setback impacting on the neighbours' proximity to a new house. Thank you.
May I ask a question, Mr De Vos? Was that statement in reference to the type of design that they had put forward, or it was a general statement of any design?
I believe the officer has written that statement in line with the type of development that's been put forward.
Thank you. We're going to need a seconder because we do have an objector. Thank you. Councillor Pearce, you move this motion. Would you care to speak to it?
Yes, I will support this recommendation. There was a submission raising concern if the property was sold, the new owner may cause difficulties. I don't believe that's a valid reason to reject this application. Secondly, there have been historical applications in this shire where setbacks have been varied due to valid issues. I do see topography is the issue, and even though I understand what Councillor McCormick has said, by a different design, maybe the variations could be addressed, but I think an owner should have the ability to decide what type of house. They also sent an email this morning to further confirm the reason why they are building this type of house and putting it within that limit is because they want to get the solar passive applications of the block and have the winter sun in the correct direction to get warmth, etc. So to me that's a valid issue to put the house where it is. And fourthly, I do believe council needs to be flexible and work with the community to achieve the best outcomes for everybody in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCormick, would you care to speak?
Thanks. So the precedence we might be setting here is that unless you're on a quite a level block, which is pretty rare in 2J, you can apply to review the setback at 30 metres, Hugo. So that was just a statement.
Are there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Hart.
Thank you. As I understand it, it's council's duty to consider the application as supplied rather than discussing alternative ways that the building might be positioned. And given the plan that's been given to us this afternoon, I'm still very much in favour of the officer's recommendation as per the agenda. Thank you.
Any further speakers for or against? I will speak. I do have some concerns along the line of Councillor McCormick's. I think if we are setting planning precedents, if we are setting planning conditions in a shire like ours with such a diversity of terrain, that we're almost setting ourselves to fail, because setback variations are going to become the norm rather than the exception, particularly if there is no requirement for them to build within the confines of their property to a style that accommodates that property. However, this application has already come to us, the costs have already been incurred, the person has already been approached. I do not feel that it is appropriate that we make a stand-on precedent now with these costs that have already been incurred by the applicant. I think this is a matter that we really need to, as a council, review as far as our policies and our policy positions. So in that way, I will not vote against this particular application, simply because I feel that the applicant would become a scapegoat for perhaps decisions we need to look at a little more closely. So thank you. Councillor McEwen.
I just need some clarification on where the setbacks are provided. Are they in the local planning scheme? Are they in the... Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't think it's a matter of policy. I think it's in the local planning scheme.
No. You're quite correct, it is in the planning scheme. However, those decisions are council made, aren't they? When we are doing, excuse me, when we are doing our recommendations on our local planning scheme, those recommendations are born within that. Is that correct?
Yes, the scheme is the council's. We also have to, we also have to look at the current delegations that are in place as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the absence of a objection after consultation, then generally these things can be done at an officer level. It's only after it is advertised that a setback variation is brought up to the council for determination. You certainly raised some good, valid points about it, and I think maybe we could consider doing some kind of design guideline work or something to be, and maybe that's the space that we should work in. And it's not necessarily a statutory requirement that they're going to need to do this, but certainly if they're moving into the Coondle area or any other area within the Shire which is prone to topography issues, then at least we can educate buyers that are coming in that this is a more appropriate kind of development that's sympathetic to the landscape.
Thank you. I think we can be more proactive. Are there any further comments for or against? In which case, Councillor Pearce, you have the right to reply.
Yes, I've listened to what people have said. I believe council has the ability to do variations, even though we do have a local planning scheme. Council does have that ability to do that. And in this case, I'm not sure that a precedent is being set, because council does have that ability to do variations when applications come before them. And as there was the one objection, and looking as the planning officer has said, from the property, and looking at the map, that is a fair distance away. There's lots of shrubs and vegetation between this house and the nearest house. So the only objection raised was because if it was sold, new owners might not be so amenable to get on with. I don't really think that's a valid objection to reject this application.
Thank you, councillor. I'll put the officer's recommendation to the vote. All in favour? Councillor Wrench, how do you vote?
I vote in favour.
All right, so those in favour is Councillor Madachi, Hart, Pearce, Jury and McEwen and Wrench. Those against? Councillor Ruthin and Councillor McCormick. Moving to the next item of business, which is 9.1.5, Lot 69, Telegraph Road, 2J, an amendment to a development approval. This item came before council late last year, and there has been a revised opinion of the owner, and council has been asked to reflect that and sorry, just bear with me for a minute. Just one moment. Thank you. The conditions are basically to delete condition 3 of the council resolution dated the 28th of September, amend condition 1 of a council resolution dated the 28th of September, and which included A, the existing heritage structure is to be retained and is not to be used for human habitation. B, a notification pursuant to sections 70A of the Transfer of Land Act of 1893 is to be placed on the certificate of title of the lots, and notice of this notification is to be included on the diagram or plan of survey, which is the deposited plan. The notification is to state as follows: the heritage cottage structure is not to be used for human habitation. And C is that the costs associated with the creation of the notification per condition of 1B2 are to be payable by the applicant. There's an advice note there that application forms for establishing and withdrawing your notification are available from the Landgate and the Landgate email address, website address. Thank you. Do we have a mover for this officer's recommendation? Councillor Hart, thank you. Are there any questions or clarifications? Councillor McEwen.
Yeah, in the resolution, point C refers to condition 1B2. There is no condition 1B2, so is that a typo?
Yes, that's a typo. B2 is to be removed. Is that correct?
Well, Actually, no, because so the actual part 2 of the resolution is referring to condition 1 of the original resolution.
Clarify that then.
Can I have clarification on the amendment, please?
Yes, so it should read, so part C should read, the cost associated with the creation of the notification per condition 1B2 of the original resolution 186/09/21 dated 28th of September 2021 are to be payable by the applicant.
I'll just give Maria a few minutes to make that amendment and for Mr De Vos to ensure that it's correct.
Is that, I'm just a bit confused. I thought those costs might be...
Excuse me, councillor, do you
Yeah,
have a
okay.
question?
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether the costs in C, I thought they referred to something, the notification pursuant to section 70A in B.
Actually, I'm just going to give Mr De Vos a few minutes to ensure that this resolution and, recommendation is correct.
Sorry, I stand corrected. It should be condition 1B1. Well, yes, if I could please.
That's to your satisfaction now, thank you, Mr De Vos. So point C now reads, the costs associated with the creation of the notification are to be payable by the applicant. Councillor McEwen, is that to your satisfaction? Thank you. Are there any further questions or clarifications? Councillor Pearce.
Yes, I'm just a little bit lacking a bit of understanding here. It says that the existing heritage to be retained and is not to be used for human habitation. So in condition 1 of that resolution, did that say that it was to be demolished? That's my question there.
Condition 3 was referring to it being demolished.
Okay, well, I also have another question. This has caused a lot of angst for me, this application in September and now being brought back to us. My question to the manager is, if council accepts this recommendation, how would this impact on future similar applications, that is 2 dwellings on a single title?
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Pearce. In this instance, because that is being decommissioned, we're not even considering it as being a dwelling anymore. So it's one dwelling on the property and one structure.
So my question is therefore, if we had another application where there was an old dwelling and someone wanted to build again, would the process be similar, that the building would have to be decommissioned before we allow the application?
It depends on the zoning of the property. So if we have the ability to have a grouped dwelling, so generally the R-coded properties, so R10 and so on in the town site and so on, we would be able to have a new dwelling and an existing one, but part of that planning process would be a change of use, so both structures are classified as a group dwelling.
Trying to understand. My question is, if we did not decommission the existing dwelling that's there, could this application still go ahead?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Any objections? In which case this item is carried unanimously under Standing Order 9.3. Moving on to item 9.2.1, list of payments. Do we have a mover? Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Do we have any questions or clarifications, please, councillors? So we have no questions or clarifications on this item. Councillor Pearce, I'm not sure if you're very busy finding the question or whether you don't have one. Right, thank you. Are there any?
No, my questions were answered in the agenda briefing notes. Thank you
very
for questions
much.
that I rose.
Do we have any objections to this item? In which case this is carried unanimously under 9.3. Thank you.
Madam President, can you ask if Maria can get rid of whatever that is?
Oh, yes. We've got some overlay on the screen that's making it a bit difficult to read. So if you move on to item 9.3.1, actually I'm very remiss. Councillor Wrench, I did not ask you how you voted on the financials.
I voted in approval.
Thank you. I stand corrected. I keep forgetting you're there. Do you have any mechanism in which you can flag to us if you wish to speak?
I can raise my hand, Rosemary, but I believe that I'm actually, my vision is behind you. So if you're happy, I can
Yes.
I can do a verbal hand raise.
Yes, certainly. Maria, if perhaps you could let me know, or a councillor, let me know if Councillor Wrench responds. Thank you. Moving on to the revised member policies of item 9.3.1. The first revised member policy, there's a number of policies on this, so we are actually, the order looks like it's changed, actually. So the first officers, so item recommendation 1 is the copyright policy, which I believe council had indicated they wanted removed to a workshop. Is there a councillor who would like to move that? Thank you. I've just realised the officer's recommendation has been altered and includes the deferral of the copyright policy. It adopts the revised policies as amended, the attendance at events, B, continuing professional development, attachment 3, the subject to the following amendments, which was the Local Government Professionals National Congress gets removed from 2.1, amends the definition of the training period to say refers to the 12-month period from the day on which the member is elected, within which the course of mandatory training must be passed. The next is inserts a new definition term, accommodation costs, where the definition will be means the cheapest 3- or 4-star accommodation, which is also the nearest option to the training venue. 4, remove the words or northern airports from airport costs definition. 5, adds the word boundary following the word 2J at point A in the definition for accommodation. And 6, inserts the words the accommodation of the ticket for the Shire, the combination of the ticket for the Shire officer and partner after the words $150 value at point 2.2. No, it's insert the words. Did I read that correctly, councillors? Thank you. Then number C was council delegates, roles and responsibilities. Attachment 4, subject to the following amendments. I, insert the word responsibility after the word fiduciary at part 6. D, council forum policy, attachment 5, subject to the following amendments. I, members for the public are not to be present at these sessions unless invited to attend by or through the CEO or Shire President. 2, at point 2C, replace the word or with the word and, so that people from the community are not to be present unless they have permission of the Shire President and CEO. 3, amend the title of point 1 to agenda briefings. And 4, amend the title of point 2 to concept forums. 5, remove the word considerations from the title of point 3. 6, amend the title of point 4 to information sessions. 7, include the words including questions and responses to further questions. After the words, notes will be taken to include attendance requests for further information at point 1. I bear in mind it's very confusing, but if you have an agenda in front of you, it would make it easier. Point 8, add a new paragraph at point 3, following the first paragraph to read, workshops are convened through the direction of either the CEO or a recommendation from the Shire President to the CEO. And 9, insert a new definition term called council forum, the definition of which shall be encompassing agenda or information briefings, concept forums, information sessions and council workshops. And the final 3, those were Roman numerals. The final 3 is authorises the Chief Executive Officer to make any necessary minor typographical changes to the above policies prior to publication. After that, I'll have a quick drink of water and we will look at recommendation 1 and do I have a mover? First. Move, thank you. Councillor Pearce. Questions and clarifications, people? Councillor McEwen has...
No, Councillor Hart.
Councillor Hart?
Thank you, Madam Shire President. I don't know if I'm being overly pedantic here, and I'm not sure exactly which of these policies this would refer to, but it's something that I've noticed in quite a lot of policies as I was working my way through them. And it comes to the definitions sections in the policies. If we have a look at the definition of council, it typically reads, the local government responsible for making decisions in formal meetings held under the auspices of Part 5 of the Local Government Act 1995 and under the Shire's Standing Orders Local Law 2008. I think that somewhat misses the point. It's somewhat wordy, and I think it can be summarised by Part 2, Division 2 of the Act. Much more succinct. I don't know if this is something that people are going to want to take on board.
So the amendment that you wish included is?
It would be an addition to the officer's recommendation that we change the definition of council in all the revised policies to Part 2, Division 2 of the Act.
Bear with me, I can't write fast enough. Of council, thank you, of council in all policies to Part 2, Division 2 of the Act. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hart has moved an amendment. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Pearce has seconded. Are there any questions or clarifications regarding that? Councillor McEwen, thank you.
Not specifically regarding that. I don't know whether I'll have to mention it now before we go any further, but this resolution asked us to pass 5 or 6 policies in one hit, and merely because maybe I don't want to defer the copyrights policy, I'll have to vote against the whole lot. So my suggestion, my clarification is it possible to break these out into one at a time?
They were originally broken down into individual amendments. I think that's going to be somewhat difficult now. Just bear with me, I'll see what can be done. It's a valid point. However, I do bear to you that you have the option of putting a amendment forward that the copyright policy is removed.
No, I've got no objection to the copyright policy
Oh.
per se. That was an example. So the second clarification is...
No, one moment.
Yeah.
We have to keep on track. At the moment, a single amendment has been put forward. Right. It's in regard to this amendment. Yes, thank you. Right. So Councillor Pearce has seconded. Is there any question or clarification to this amendment that Councillor Hart is proposing? That in addition, if you could care to read the wording out, in addition, that the term council...
That we change the term, the definition of council in all the revised policies to read Part 2, Division 2 of the Act.
Of the Local Government Act, it should read.
No, the Act, because the Act is defined elsewhere in the definitions.
No, that's fine. In the resolution, we need to be very clear which Act we're referring to. Is there any objections to this? If there's no objections, then this is carried 9.3 and becomes part of the substantive motion. Councillor Wrench, were you in agreement?
I am in agreement.
Keep asking you after. I do apologise. Moving forward, are there any further questions or clarifications? Councillor Pearce.
I have another amendment that I would like to add.
Councillor, would you care to state your amendment?
The amendment concerns the council forum policy, and I would like added after section 3, which was called workshop consideration, but I believe that has now been dropped, that the flow chart on the timeline process for policy review and determination uses Teams is added at that point.
Councillors, are there any questions or clarifications with regard to this proposed amendment? Councillor Pearce, is that written as you intend it to be read?
It is, but I'm looking at it. Maria, could I look at it again, please? The point of this amendment is that we have a timeline process, and I can see for policy and review and determination uses Teams, but maybe we might use Teams as well as other means, so I'm not sure whether that should be there. The most important to me is the timeline process that we have discussed.
May I suggest, Councillor, that the words and determination, for review and remove the words uses Teams is added at that point. Just take that out and it reads in the policy for in the council forum policy at workshops. No, this is not. This sentence makes no sense to me, how it's written. You're intending that the flow chart on the timeline process is used to provide the process for policy review. Is that, so it doesn't matter whether it's Teams or whether it's workshop or policy review. So perhaps that needs to be reworded to reflect that in the, can we just go down to that item? Right, that this is my suggestion, you don't have to accept it, that the flow chart, that the policy review flow chart and timeline process is used, or the timeline process is used in all policy reviews. Would that?
Yeah, I think that's correct, because we already have a policy that policy will be determined once in discussion with councillors, new policies in that way. So it's just the policy review that we need to have this process in place.
Now, do we need to define the flow chart I'll just defer. Okay, so at the moment, just reminding that although we have the flow chart, we haven't actually formally adopted it. So the adoption would be within this. So perhaps that needs to be that council adopts the flow chart as proposed for policy review, the flow chart and timeline. That council adopts, oh, now you've lost me. That council adopts the flow chart and timeline as proposed for policy review. And we did propose it, and what probably a date would be useful, but we don't have that to hand. Do you want to withdraw this particular item to workshop, or because we don't have the flow chart attached to the minutes, to the agenda, so we're making reference to a document that we haven't adopted or have attached for the general public. Although council and senior management is familiar with it, the public has not. And it's not included in here. So the other option is either that is removed and not put in there, and that becomes a decision for a later date as an attachment to this policy, or we defer this particular policy to workshop.
Well, I think...
one moment. Continue, and then I'll refer to Councillor McEwen. Do you have a question, Councillor McEwen?
Yes.
Is it relevant to this particular issue we have at the moment?
It's relevant to the fact that you just raised that the public hasn't seen what we've seen.
Exactly, I'm aware of it. And if we can't really be putting this in the... if we have not put that into the attachment. Thank you. Go ahead, please, Councillor.
My question is, I can't find it, but it says, I'm sure it says in the standing orders that once an agenda item was information to be provided at council is provided to councillors, it has to be provided to the public?
Yes, that's correct.
And did that happen in this case?
No, that's exactly what we're stating here.
In which case this whole item might have to be rolled over.
Not the item, the amendment, because the amendment is referring to this one item that has not been put to the public.
Yeah, just...
That didn't answer my question, or clarify it. What I'm thinking is, what I'm concerned about is that...
Has the amended...
all those resolutions that were there, that with all those that you read out and had to have a drink of water after, all those amendments... we were aware of.
Have they gone to the public?
Yes.
Thank you. I will just clarify.
Just to clarify that...
Just
to clarify that, we often have an agenda that goes out to the public, and then when it comes to council, council has an amendment which is different to what is put to the public. So this is exactly what we are doing here. We are amending those policies that have been put out. That is my understanding.
Yeah, but my understanding is that we saw these amendments before we got here, because I've seen them before. It wasn't just today, that's the first time we've seen them.
Yeah, but I don't know if I'm allowed to talk. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm just saying that your question was to the President, the presiding member, that what goes in the agenda is what the public sees. But when it comes to council, council can amend an officer's recommendation, and therefore these policies have been recommended.
Councillor, I'm sorry, just bear with me. I'm just discussing this matter further because I do think there is a hitch here and it's become quite apparent to me at the moment. So if you can just all please hold your horses. Right. Now. Right, thank you. Okay, councillors. There's been a little bit of confusion, so I'll just make it quite clear. The item that I've read out is the amended officer's recommendation. So in actual fact, we have slipped on procedure a little because we should have dealt with, and I have to say this is my fault. I really need a hard copy in front of me because this sliding up and down the screen is a little bit difficult to see where I'm at. I thought I was reading out the original officer's recommendation, which is on the website, and then this was actually the amended officer's recommendation. So we really should have dealt with first the officer's recommendation, so it was either lost or somebody moved to accept the officer's amended recommendation. So we have moved this one. We are actually on the amended officer's recommendation. That's the first part. The second part is, because Councillor McEwan is quite correct, what is put up into the website is the agenda. If we are going to amend an agenda, then it must be as an amended officer's recommendation or an alternate officer's recommendation, which you then have a choice of two. And those two is then council's decision which they go with. So we know what the original agenda item was, but unfortunately, and I will bear responsibility for that because I did not realise we were moving straight to the amended officer's recommendation. We've actually moved the amended officer's recommendation. a question.
Yeah. My query was different to that. My query is that councillors were provided with information regarding the revised recommendation before today, were we not? Were we given those revised recommendations before today?
We put forward the revised, but we didn't receive the hard copy of that.
No. Did we receive notification of the revised recommendations before today on the hub?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we were given access to item on the agenda, the revised officer's recommendations. I can't remember when it was, but it was definitely before today.
That's correct.
Okay, but that wasn't made available to the public.
No, the revised officer's recommendation quite often isn't.
Okay, now let me raise an official point of order under section 5.14 of the standing orders.
5.14. Yes, please go ahead.
5.14 says, local government is to ensure that notice papers and agenda relating to a council or committee meeting...
Sorry, I
in the
actually can't... In the box.
In the box.
Okay, so you're looking at the extract of the Act, yes?
The regulation, yeah.
Yep.
Local government is to ensure that notice papers and agenda relating to any council meeting and reports which are to be tabled at the meeting or which have been produced by the local government or committee for presentation at the meeting and have which been made available to members of the council.
Councillor McEwen, you're reading this out of the standing orders?
Yes.
Because we only go to point 3 of the regulations and standing orders. So where is your point 4?
I didn't mention point 4. I'm reading section 5.14. Public inspection of agenda materials.
No, he's saying 5.1.
5.14, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So
Thank you.
If we're on the same page, I'll start again.
Start again, please.
And we're in the box. Local government is to ensure that notice papers and agenda relating to any council meeting, which are to be tabled at the meeting or have been produced by local government for presentation at the meeting, and which have been made available to members of the council, which all these amendments have, are available for inspection by members of the public from the time the notice papers were made available to the members of the council. And that didn't happen.
No, and you're quite correct, and unfortunately, it seems to have been an endemic oversight because we have never historically done that, and we've assumed that the presentation at the meeting has been the process that has been adopted was correct. So let me just...
Sorry, through the chair. The amended officer's recommendation mirrors the points raised at the agenda briefing and included in the agenda briefing notes, which were posted to the website. So that they, for the purpose of the meeting, we prepared an amended officer's recommendation in readiness for the meeting to reflect the changes in the notes.
Disputing that, I'm disputing the problem is that you told council, or you advised councillors of those amended resolutions sometime late last week, I don't know, sometime then, but you didn't make that available to the public, which is required by section 5.14, or by the regulations, in fact. So the public's never seen these amended resolutions till if they happen to walk in the door. And in fact, I don't think they're even in the agenda that's been handed out. I don't know.
No, they're not.
No. So the public's never seen it, had access to these, and it says here that they have to be made available to the public from the time they're made available to council. It says that, that's what
Councillor
it says.
McEwen, I'm not quite sure if the interpretation of this is quite correct, because what is the intent of what they're saying? They are saying that notice papers and the agenda relating to council or committee meeting and reports and other documents. So you're talking about the context of the actual meeting items. A, are to be tabled at the meeting, so any item report needs to be tabled at the meeting or on the website. Any notice papers with reference to that have been and B, have been produced by the local government or a committee for presentation at the meeting. That is not what we're actually doing at the moment. What we're putting forward, which the public is available, is alternate recommendation.
No, you've missed my point, Madam President.
Hang on. The original recommendation is still there. Please clarify. Councillor, I agree we often...
The point I'm making is that the councillors' documents were made available to councillors, including the revised recommendations. We got copies of those. We got them by, I don't know if they were on the hub or they were there somewhere. In fact, they're probably on the hub now. We had access to the revised officer's recommendations, which are to be tabled at the meeting. That's why the officer revised them, so they could table them at the meeting. But those officers' recommendations, those revised recommendations, were not made available to the public. I'm not arguing about whether we can make revision or not. I'm arguing about, was the public given access to those tabled documents that were to be tabled at the same time that councillors were? Because that's what Section 5, that's what the Regulation 14 of the regulation says must happen.
Okay. I do understand what you're saying, and I do understand that that the point is that the public did not receive notice at the time, and you perceive that to be in breach of Regulation 14. I'm not convinced that is the correct interpretation with an alternate recommendation, because having said that, councillors also put out alternate recommendations and in fact often table them on the day, which other councillors are not privy to and the public certainly hasn't. So I would like to follow through on that and seek clarification.
Okay, well, the point, if somebody raises it today, that's okay, because no one's seen it. But councillors were given copies of these revised recommendations and they weren't made available to the public.
We will have to follow up and check on that, because that's not been raised before. I fully understand what you're saying. I fully understand what you're saying. I am not sure if that is the interpretation. And why I say that is because quite often there are certain things that are not seen as that, because the clarity is not always as what it should be in the Act. But we will find out, we will follow through, and we need to follow through and make sure that we are acting appropriately. So if you bear with me for a moment.
I'll just refer you, before we, Madam President, before we go off, we were given the revised officer's recommendation.
Can I suggest we adjourn for 10 minutes and get some advice on this matter, please? Thank you. We will be adjourning for 10 minutes. One of the things I like about this council, and thank you all very much for waiting, is that we're not afraid to say what we have to say, and I think that's a very healthy dynamic. We have sought some advice on this matter simply because I was uncertain of my interpretation and wanted clarification of Regulation 14. What we've been informed that Regulation 14 is primarily a public information provision and it's not considered statutory because the Act does not go on to invalidate does not go on to invalidate a action under that. It's basically a practicality. It does insist, the basis is that the public are aware of what is on the agenda, and that must be on the agenda, that supporting documentation should be on the agenda and reports, but that when you come to putting forwards minor variations or variations, so you're putting forward alternate recommendations or you're putting forward amendments, when, for instance, you're putting forward something as simple as a plan that was whipped up at the last minute to give councillors a little further clarity, there is no obligation to put that out to the public because the public become aware of that in the course of the meeting. So, we're back to the amended officer's recommendation, which Councillor Pearce has moved and was in the process of putting in an amendment. Now, the problem we do feel with the... So, would you like to continue, Councillor Pearce?
I'm not sure if it's valid because you said we don't have the flowchart attachment. So if that's the case, would it be prudent of me to withdraw my amendment? I'm asking advice on this.
It would probably, under this circumstances, be prudent, Councillor, and I accept that withdrawal. So, are there any further questions or clarifications? Councillor Hart.
I just want to check that we're talking about the questions and clarifications about the amended officer's recommendation. Have I got that right, please?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. I would like to raise another point about the definitions in the revised documents, which is that the definition of...
No, excuse me, Councillor. We're not raising, we're putting forward an amendment or we're asking questions or clarifications.
Okay, I'd like to suggest an amendment.
Please.
Thank you. That the definition of Shire President be reworded as defined in section 2.8.
Just slow down to allow Maria to type this. Now just proceed slowly as she types it, if you wouldn't mind.
Read off the screen. Defined in section 2.8 of the Local Government Act.
So the rest of the sentence she didn't catch. So what was the proposed amendment in the section to do with?
To replace the definition of the Shire President
is replaced as defined.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or clarifications regarding this amendment? Councillor Pearce.
My question is, if this definition comes in all policies, does that mean that when anyone who reads the policy need to go to the Act to find out the definition of Shire President.
Yes, that would be if the definition is not included. So perhaps you need to, my suggestion would be for clarity of policy, because clarity of policy, as I've always said, should be in its entirety. A person should pick up that policy and be able to read through it and understand what it relates to, not have to go to secondary documents.
Request leave while I look into the Act.
Beg your pardon?
Request leave for me to look into the Act right now and to suggest an alternative form of words. Or do we want to defer that? I'm looking for guidance here.
Do you wish to withdraw that?
I'll withdraw it.
Thank you, Councillor. So Councillor Hart has withdrawn that amendment. Are there any further questions or clarifications or amendments? Councillor McEwen.
Yeah, I think there's already an amendment to the concept forums policy, or the forums policy. If we could have a look at those.
Can we just scan down to the concept forum amendments in there?
Yeah, wherever they are.
Right, amend the title of point 1.
Yeah, point number 7, where we've amended it to include questions and responses to further questions.
Yes.
So we're going to note the questions and the further responses. We're going to minute them if you like. So my question is, can we also include in that amendment, change that amendment slightly, just leave it as it is, so including questions and responses. So after the word, after further questions, so ask it after where it says further questions, so just in there, insert and the names or the titles of the, I'll say names for the moment, and the names of the persons asking and answering the questions. You see what I'm getting at? So not at the moment, the names of the councillors are in there and the names of the respondees are in there, the responders are in there. But that's not, can you see what I'm getting at? So, yeah.
Would you accept the word titles, not names? No. Councillor McEwen has moved a further amendment. The amendment's on the screen for those that are familiar with that. Are there any questions or clarifications relating to that? Are there any objections? If there's no objections, this becomes part of Councillor McEwen's amendment, becomes part of the substantive motion. Maria, can we just scan back, please, to where Councillor Pearce was making amendments? I'm not sure exactly where that was on the screen here. Right. I'm going to suggest an amendment to this. Could we just go back to that spot for a moment, please? Thank you. I'm going to suggest a further amendment that in the council forum policy, which has disappeared, Maria, I do need, yeah, thank you. In the council forum policy, that an agreed process and timeline be included. In the council forum policy, an agreed process and timeline be included for the review hang on. No, hang on. What? It's all changed to what I said, isn't it? Excuse me, Maria, you've just amended what I was saying. It's in the policy that I want this, that I had before. Moved an amendment to the council forum policy that an agreed process and timeline be included in the council forum policy for the review of policy.
May I make a suggestion, Madam President?
Yes, certainly.
That this be inserted in the section 3 under workshops.
And that it be inserted under section 3 in workshops. Thank you. Are there any questions or clarifications to this amendment? Are there any objections? Councillor McEwen?
My objection is that it doesn't say who is to agree on this policy, where it's to come from.
Okay, that's quite correct. That council agrees to a process and timeline. Oh, that's not going to work either. Agree.
Unless we know what it is we're agreeing to, we can't do it.
Right. Perhaps it would be best to actually put that in there now of what we're agreeing, so that what I'll do is that the amendment is that inserted, we'll just scrapple that, inserted under section 3 in workshops of the council forum policy. The following procedure for the review of policy be included. Easy, be included. A, 1 month before the agenda briefing, policies are put to Teams or in hard copy, are put to Teams for review. B, 10 days or after 10 days, councillors are requested to review the Teams changes and inform administration and inform administration of their acceptance or not of the proposed changes. C, on the third day, the changes, if there is a majority acceptance, are incorporated into a draft policy for the agenda. D, if there is not majority acceptance, or if the policy is new, it is deferred to a workshop. That's what I'm proposing. And then E, changes agreed at the workshop are incorporated into the agenda, the item for the agenda, or the policy for the agenda, into the policy for the agenda.
Draft policy. Draft policy?
Draft policy for the agenda. Make it draft policy for each reference. Yeah, thank you. Into the draft policy, thank you. All right, we even really could have said on C, I'd just amend that and not take out the words for the agenda, incorporated into a draft policy. Remove for the agenda. That's my proposed amendment. Are there any questions or clarifications? Councillor Pearce?
You've used the word Teams. At the moment, that is the technology available, but maybe that may change.
That's quite correct.
Perhaps we need to have a different phrase there.
Okay. So we could simply remove the word Teams and put are supplied to councillors for review. With any further questions, clarifications, alterations? Is that relatively to all councillors? I would like are supplied to all councillors, and that allows us to. Councillor Pearce?
Could you please explain to me on the third day the changes? I'm not sure, after 10 days?
Or we really should say after 3 days, the changes. Would that be better? Sounds like a biblical proportions there, didn't it? After 3 days, the changes. After 3 days, if there is majority acceptance, the changes are incorporated into a draft policy. Does that read correctly? Right.
So, Madam President, take out the reference to Teams in B.
In B, all right, to review the changes, yes. Thank you. Generally, right, are there any further questions or clarifications? Well, that we have said to all councillors, which would cover that. Councillor, is there any, Councillor McEwen?
Yeah, can we change, I'm not saying I'm going to vote for this, but can we change policies in A to a policy? Is?
Month before.
Because later on we talk about a policy.
Or maybe we can just put there policy or policies.
You're going to have to do that all the way through it then.
Yeah, it gets a bit wieldy. I think we might just leave it as a policy and remove all policies. Yes, that's better. Thank you. Okay, if we can make that change. Yes, thank you, Maria. You jump ahead of us all. Any further comments, councillors? If not, then we will require a seconder. Councillor Pearce, are you seconding? Thank you. All in favour of the amendment as put? Councillor Councillor Wrench?
In favour.
Thank you. All in favour? Therefore, it was carried unanimously and forms part of the substantive motion. Now, any further changes, amendments, questions, clarifications to do with this?
Yeah, I'm still concerned that if I want to vote against one policy, I've got to vote against them all.
No, I would suggest, councillor, that you put an amendment, and if you require assistance, just ask. Of course, if you ask the dyslexic Shire President, I'm not sure what assistance you will be provided, but nevertheless, would you like and the amendment can be a removal of?
No, just as a general principle, we've got 7 policies. Oh no, I think 5 of them are going to be in a job lot. 5 policies in a job lot. And as a general principle, I think that's unwise, courageous in fact, and so it would be better to do them one at a time.
It would, but we have not moved at that point. So if there's something within there that you would like to move, that it's, if there's a particular policy in there that you have concerns with, you can move that be removed from the officer's recommendation and dealt with separately. There is nothing.
Okay, I'll move an amendment that that officer's recommendation be split out into 5 resolutions.
It'd be quite difficult to do it at this stage, councillor. Just bear with me, we'll see if we can do that. We're going to see if we can accommodate you. It's been quite a long meeting today. It's always a bit difficult when we have a lot of policies and there's little tweaking and changes that need to be done. Despite the best work that was done beforehand, often in hindsight you do see something else that needs addressing. So thank you for your patience. We're just waiting for Maria to see if there's a way to simplify this to make it easier to accommodate Councillor McEwen, who wishes to deal with them separately. The seconder for Councillor McEwen's amendment that they are separated. Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Oh, sorry. I've just asked for a show of hands to support Councillor McEwen's request they be separated. Thank you. Danielle, is that your hand up? You're not?
No.
You're not supporting it?
Oh, yes, sorry, I am supporting it.
Yeah, thank you. Councillors, although we've split it up within the officer's recommendation, alternate recommendation, they cannot be adopted separately, I don't think, because they form part of the substantive motion that we have not voted on. So we have them separate so that you'll be able to see what needs to be of each particular policy, which I think will make it a bit easier. However, we have a substantive motion on the table that we haven't voted on. And so we can't simply discard that and have a new set of officers' recommendations. You understand where I'm coming from?
So this is an amendment that we need to vote on. We voted that we're going to split them, and now we can't vote even though
we've amended to separate them. We've separated them, but we have to separate them, unfortunately, within the amended officer's recommendation. It will make it a little clearer, I think, as far as people making amendments and what they're comfortable with, or if they feel that they need to move to have one section withdrawn, but is part of the substantive motion that hasn't been voted on, and therefore we can't just dispense with that mid-ride and put new ones in place. Is that understood?
Yeah, but that wasn't the intent of my resolution.
I know it wasn't. Unfortunately, we had that substantive motion still active.
So the alternative is to vote the substantive motion down and adopt an amended motion, or 5 amended motions as alternatives.
Yep, it's possible, but you moved that as an amendment within the substantive. You didn't move that as a foreshadowed or alternative motion. So what I suggest we do is put the substantive motion as it stood with those alterations to the vote, and we decide whether or not we're accepting that substantive motion, or do you wish to withdraw? It's becoming very complicated, Councillor McEwen, because we have to observe the process, which, as you're aware, we're in the middle of the substantive motion. So we can separate them for clarity within that motion, but if we're going to separate them into individual motions, then this would have to fail, and you then move an alternate or foreshadow a alternate motion that we address them with the changes. We can't because we haven't adopted the changes in the substantive. Yes, Councillor.
I move understanding orders, point 10.8, that the question be put to the substantive motion. And, yeah.
So you're moving, sorry, what number?
10.8.
10.8, thank you.
The question be put for the substantive motion. Yeah, no more discussion.
All right. There's no further discussion. Councillor has moved that the motion be put. So all in favour of the substantive motion as it stands now, put your hands up. All against? The substantive motion fails, and Councillor, I believe your intent was to foreshadow a...
But I didn't do it.
No, you didn't. So the motion, the substantive motion has failed, and those against, hands up again, were Councillor Madachi, Ruthin, McEwen, Hart, Wrench, McCormick. Was your hand up? No. And those 4 were Councillor Pearce and Councillor Jury. Oh, Councillor Wrench, did you have your hand up for...
I had my hand up with yourself, Madam President.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yep, thank you. Right, and you've not foreshadowed. So it is lost, and we need to move to the next item. Damn it. Thank you, councillors. It's been a bit of a fiasco today. But policies are a difficult issue to contend with. We're moving to item 9.3.2, Administration and Government Policies. The first policy they have been separated into separate recommendations. There are 6 recommendations within there. So moving to recommendation 1, the policy is legal representation and cost indemnification. I'm definitely going to take a hard copy in future. I find this quite difficult. So we are still on the previous item, which was 9.3.1, and we are now looking at the recommendation 2, which is the policy appointment of acting or temporary CEO policy. Do I have a mover for this policy? Thank you. Councillor Pearce. Are there any questions or clarifications coming out of this policy? No? Any objections? No? In which case this has been passed, understanding order 9.3 unanimously. Then we move to recommendation 3, which adopts the new policy, execution of policy documents policy. Do I have a mover? Councillor McCormick. Any questions or clarifications with this one? Any objections? This one is also carried by 9.3 unanimously. Now, okay, thank you. So now we're moving to item 9.3.2, back to administration and government policies, and recommendation 1, which is the revised legal representation and cost indemnification policy. Do I have a mover for this policy, please? The officer's recommendation, I should say. Councillor Hart? Any questions or clarifications? Any objections? This is carried by 9.3 unanimously. The next one is recommendation 2, revised compliance and enforcement policy. Again, I need a mover. Does everybody know without? Thanks. Yes, we are. Are there any questions or clarifications from the compliance and enforcement policy? Councillor Pearce.
I did raise questions at the briefing, and it appears that even in the Act and the regulations, there is no penalties when a elected member has been sanctioned to fine in breach and then refuses to do the undertake the action prescribed. My question is, we have a policy. What is the validity if there is no penalty if a elected member does not carry out the action required?
I think, Councillor, that is a question many elected members are asking right now. Unfortunately, we can only hope that the feedback that the government has received and Wagga has received from councillors, elected members in the community will lead to a revision of that shortcoming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or clarifications? Any objections? If there are no objections, this is passed unanimously by 9.3. I'm missing one here. Right, thank you. Moving on to recommendation 3. That Council revokes the establishment and operation of bushfire brigades policy and authorises the CEO to arrange for the bushfire operational procedures to be reviewed and brought back to Council through the Bushfire Advisory Committee by December 2022. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Jury. Do I have any questions or clarifications? Any objections? In which case, this Councillor Wrench, I'm just checking you. You're okay? No objections?
No objections, Madam President.
All right, thank you. In which case, this is also carried unanimously by 9.3. Moving on to recommendation 4. I see they've been renumbered. Okay. That Council revoked the current Freedom of Information policy. I think everybody's fairly across why this is. Do I have a mover for this motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Jury. Are there any questions or clarifications arising from this? Any objections? In which case, this is also carried by Standing Order 9.3 unanimously. Thank you. We now move on to recommendation 5, which is the revised complaints of alleged breach of the Code of Conduct for members, committee members and candidates policy as amended, subject to the following amendment. That at point 8, a new paragraph be inserted following the second paragraph to read as follows. The Complaints Officer for the Shire of 2J will comply with section 5.106 and section 5.107 of the Act in respect to an alleged minor breach. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Any questions or clarifications? Any objections? This is also carried 9.3 unanimously. Thank you. Moving to Officer's recommendation 9.6. There is an Officer's recommendation that the Council adopt the legislative compliance policy as amended. Is there a mover? Councillor.
I'd like to foreshadow an alternative motion.
Thank you. Would you like to state your alternate motion?
The alternative motion is that we defer this one to discuss in a workshop.
Thank you. Councillor Ruthin has moved, foreshadowed an alternate motion to defer the legislative compliance policy to workshop. So the officer's recommendation stands that it's adopted. Is there a mover? Then the officer's recommendation fails for a mover. And the Councillor Ruthin's foreshadowed alternate motion now stands. Councillor Ruthin? Are there any questions or clarifications with regard to Councillor Ruthin's alternate motion?
I guess we just need to see the wording of the resolution.
Beg your pardon?
See the wording of the actual resolution. We haven't seen that.
Foreshadow an alternate motion to defer the legislative compliance policy until the May 2022 ordinary council meeting so it can be workshopped.
Yeah, I see she foreshadowed it, but she hasn't put the motion. The motion isn't there.
No, that is the alternate motion.
The alternative motion is that there's...
So she's moved an alternate motion. First she foreshadowed it and now she's moved. Oh, I see. I'm with you. Yep. I'm getting used to your how you do it. Okay, so first you foreshadowed and now it's been moved. One, the other. So, councillors, no, it's correct. Councillors, do we have any questions or clarifications to this now substantive motion? Yes, Councillor Pearce.
I have a question. It be deferred to the May 2022 Ordinary Council meeting? So
no, it should be.
It
should be deferred to workshop.
Yes.
To the May workshop.
Well, I'm not sure if that's yeah. Okay.
I guess Councillor Ruthven could answer that.
Councillor Ruthven, what was your intent?
My intent was that it would be workshopped in May, if that's appropriate. Otherwise, if that's not soon enough, if that's too soon for the...
But you're putting unfortunately, you're having to word this.
Yeah, I know.
So how would you wish it worded?
That the legislative compliance policy be deferred to the next available workshop. And that, I'm saying that because I don't know what's on the schedule for the workshops that are coming up.
Would you like to clarify that and say general workshop or non-budget workshop?
Well, it's not budget, so yes, general workshop.
Councillor Pearce?
May I make a suggestion that the compliance policy be deferred for the next, remove the word next general workshop, be deferred until the next policy workshop, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Do you accept that?
Yes, I accept that amendment, thank you.
So it'll be deferred to the next policy workshop. That was accepted by Councillor Ruthven. And it's not been seconded yet, so that is fine. Right. Any further questions or clarification? Any further comment? Any objections? In which case, this has been carried by 9.3 unanimously. Right, councillors, we're now moving to the item 9.3.3, the total project costs for the 2J Recreation Centre. This has also, I believe, got a number of recommendations there. Am I correct? Or only one? Right, looks like this has all got caught up. Okay, that's fine. Not a problem, I'm across it. So the officer's recommendation is that council receives and notes the total costs of the 2J Recreation Centre as outlined in and attached to this report. There is further attachments, I believe page 141, if anybody cares to follow through. So, do I have a mover for this officer's recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Do we have any questions or clarifications? Certainly, Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Madam President. So if we compare the item on page 40 of the agenda, the table at the top, on page 40 for the construction costs, which is 17,816,370, with the table on page 141 of the attachments, or indeed, no, you don't have to go that far. Compare the table at the top of page 40 with the last paragraph on page 40. The last paragraph refers to the defects liability period, when there was an expenditure of $30,210. I just wondered why that defects liability period wasn't included in the construction cost table.
Sorry, through the chair. You mean in the
Certainly,
attachment?
Mrs. Bateman.
Yep. No, this one here. On page, just forget the red herring I threw in about page 141.
Okay.
Just look at page 40 of the agenda.
Okay,
So the table at the top is the construction cost, but it excludes the defects liability period where costs were incurred. I just wondered why that was left off.
I guess because it was a standalone, it wasn't so much as part of the construction or the land purchase or those items detailed in the first table. Perhaps we could have made it clearer by adding the 30,210 to that final paragraph, perhaps.
Point taken. And I would just clarify why in the body of the agenda, like on where we're looking now, the total cost wasn't quoted. We have to go to the final figure on the last line of page 141 of the attachments to see the actual total cost.
I take your point, councillor. Could move.
I guess it's there, if some people want to see what it is. $19.2 million. Yeah.
It may also be simply the report is written with the progression so that members of the public can follow the progression through in a systematic way to reach the conclusion, rather than provide a lot of figures that it's very difficult for the layman to follow. Councillor Pearce.
I would like to make an amendment, following from what Councillor McEwen has said, to please include in the officer's recommendation that total figure that is described on page 141 of the attachments. So that's my amendment.
Thank you, councillor. Is that how you wish it worded?
Except for the total. The total is not there. So the total, which is...
So what you're asking, that it reads that the total... No. That the council receives and notes the total cost of $19,202,718 of the 2J Recreation Centre as outlined in and attached to this report. Just Just note that that cost is to date, because we still have interest outstanding on loans. So perhaps that should be clarified in there.
Yes, definitely.
I think that wording has got a bit confused. Is that, excuse me, Maria, is the wording that you're putting in front of us the actual amendment? Because that's not how it was said. The amendment was written to say that council receives and notes the total cost of $19,202,718. So $19,202,718 million to date of the 2J Recreation Centre as outlined and attached to this report. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, Councillor Pearce, that perhaps you need to add something slightly to that, because the question is going to be, what are the hidden costs? Where in fact, what we're referring to is the interest on the loan. Yep. So, right. So, do you want to add anything further to that? As that stands, please correct me and make sure that is the way you wish it worded.
Well, yes, because it's to date. I know there are other costs that will be incurred in future years, but to date, that is the total cost of the 2J Rec Centre as presented by that report. Unless someone would like to suggest a different wording.
Yes, Councillor Ruthin.
The figure that's been discussed has been the 14.9 million for construction. And I'd like to see something in the wording here to stress that this is the total project cost from purchase of the land.
Yeah, but
I am,
Do you wish that included, Councillor Pearce, that you put notes the total project cost?
yes, I would be quite happy to the total project costs.
So you accept the insertion of the word project between the word total and cost?
Yes, I will.
Maria, if you just insert the word project on Councillor Pearce's amendment, that would do that. I think there's a little bit of confusion on the amount. I will allow, I would request that Mrs. Bateman addresses this so that you have some clarity.
Through the chair. If we're referring to the total project cost, are we wanting to include the value of 17 million? Or are we talking about the total cost to date of 19 million? We will continue to have expenses and this number will grow.
I think it's relevant that we've got to date, that is the total project cost to date. I would hope that the community would understand that there will be ongoing costs in relation to that.
May I suggest they are looking at resolution at the moment of what it costs to build. That's what they're looking at, what it costs to build. So that is the, 17,816,370. The 19 includes extras and additional. So I think there needs to be some clear clarity in the resolution that the community gets some solace from. They understand clearly what it's meant.
I'd like to move.
Councillor McCormick.
Could I suggest, for clarity, that the handover from ADCO Constructions to the Shire would clarify what the cost is at that point? It's project completion, possibly.
There were some costs that came after the handover, though, to do with the reconciling. Would they be included or not?
And any defects, issues that were raised.
I suggest an amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll leave it what you've got, the 19 million in there, but we'll put in, we know what the construction cost was because it's on page 40. So, and if we can note the cost of, what do they actually call it here? The cost of construction of the TRC was 17,816,370, because that's what we've been told. And the
Yep.
total project cost to date is 19, whatever it is. Yeah. So put both the numbers in.
Perhaps with that 17 million, just a suggestion here, is that we preface that the planning, development and construction costs of the facility total 17 million and...
All
Yeah.
right. So you wish to go back and review that first amendment of yours. So Maria, are you across what's happening at the moment? You're typing at a frantic rate and there's quite a bit going on. Councillor Pearce, can you just reiterate your actual motion as you wish it to stand now?
That council receives and note the total planning, development and construction costs of totalled 17,800. Okay. And the total project cost to date is the 19 million of the... Mhm. Yeah, to date. Yeah, to date.
Between cost and all.
Total.
No, where you work. Councillor Pearce, I'm asking you to be vigilant about how it all comes together, that it is your motion as it stands. Amendment.
Yes, thank you, Maria. That's, I think, outlines what I had in mind.
So you're content with that? Thank you. So, are there any further questions, clarifications? Yes, Councillor McCormick.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions regarding the timeline on the project, as mentioned on page 37.
Oh, look, excuse me, Councillor, I've been a bit remiss here. We are still dealing with the amendment. Is this with relation to the actual amendment?
No, not the amendment.
All right. Then we need to deal with the amendment first. Councillor Pearce has the amendment before us, so I do need a seconder. All right, thank you, Councillor Hart. Are there any objections? Then we'll put it to the vote. Because I've taken a seconder, Councillor, so all in favour of Councillor Pearce's amendment? Show of hands. Thank you. That was unanimous. Now, councillor McCormick, you did have a question?
Yeah, just a couple of questions on the timeline mentioned on page 37.
Yes.
Throughout the project's development.
Yes.
On page 38, under the year of 2016, it mentions that there was an application for CSRFF funding for multi-use courts times 6. I'm just questioning whether that's accurate. In the numbers of courts.
The information that is in here has been taken directly from minutes as it sequentially occurred throughout the years. As you read through to realise that there were a number of amendments made as the years passed and changes to the original plan. So that's how it would stand in 2016. They've obviously gone through and then reviewed their business case in 2017, and again, according to the figures, it appears further amendments may have been made in 18-19.
Yeah, there's just no mention further on of any change.
No, because if you note, in 2017, they reduced the scope of stage 1. And that was in response, from memory, to a suggestion of an $8 million loan, and it was reconsidered. So they reduced some of the scope.
Thanks.
Any further questions or clarifications to the substantive motion? Any further amendments? Then I need are there any objections to the substantive motion as it now stands? In which case it's carried 9-3. Thank you. I don't know where I am now. We're moving on to item 9.4.1, the road upgrade criteria policy. Are there any questions or clarifications? Do I have a mover? Councillor Ruthin? Any objections? Then the policy has been carried, items been carried, but 9.3 unanimously. Moving on to item 9.5.1, expression of interest to join the Environmental Advisory Committee by Mr Justin von Perger. Do I have a mover for this motion? Thank you, Councillor Jury. Any questions or clarifications? Any objections? This motion is carried unanimously 9.3. I can see you now, Councillor Wrench, so I can see when you put your hand up. The item 12.1, Councillor McEwen's questions previously taken on notice. There is a motion that they are received and noted. Are there any questions or clarifications arising out of these? Councillor McEwen.
On page 49 of the agenda, question 1 consisted of 2 questions, 1A and 1B. Neither of those questions was answered. Is there a reason for that?
I will just defer to the acting CEO, please.
Chair, Madam President. Yeah, I think we responded to this at the meeting, the agenda briefing, sorry, where, so in relation to 1B, what was the source of the Shire funds used to pay for the overspend? I believe the response was that because we didn't have the audited financials available at this point, that the overspend came from the surplus at the end of the year, where any underspends have occurred. That hasn't yet been identified.
Okay, so we don't know what caused the overspend, and at the moment we can't answer that question. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, question 3, which is on the next page. Don't worry about that one. I'll move on to question 6. Question 6 was a question about the ADCO contract, and at the bottom of page 50 there was a question about the cause of the overspend, and I think that was more or less answered, that there were contract variations. But the second part of question 6 was why and how was the payment of the overspend authorised, given that we had a resolution before council of the amount to spend of 14.5 million, and 14 more than that was spent. 14.9 million was spent, where only 14.5 million was authorised by resolution. That wasn't answered.
Quite a lot of information just to go through. Just bear with us for a moment. Councillor, we may well have to take that on notice and follow through. My recollection is, and I may stand corrected, so that an overspend came to council at one stage to be endorsed. I think it was back in 2020, but we need to go and sort that document. Thank you. Any further questions or clarifications? Is there a mover that Councillor McEwen's, where is the officer's recommendation? I'll just wait for Maria to catch up. Right, thank you. That the officer's recommendation that the responses to questions taken on notice be received and noted. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Jury. No further questions or clarifications?
No, except to say...
You'd like that noted?
That follow-up.
Yes.
No, as long as it's... I take your word for it if you do it.
Yeah, it will definitely follow up. And are there any objections? If not, this is carried 9.3 unanimously. I have to go back and double check all. I really want to thank you all, because it has been a long meeting. And let's face it, policy for many is extremely difficult to take in large bites, and it has been a large bite today. So I thank you all for your attendance and your patience, and I will declare the meeting closed at 4:24. Thank you.